So we're going to do a video for you about grip size and how it affects performance. So we've got a variety of different grip types, but really about size. We're going to switch them onto this club, so we're only going to change the grip, look at how the performance changes, describe the feels, and look at kind of who it might be suitable for and why you may go to one size versus another. There isn't an exact, if your hand is this size, you must use this grip, because people might have physical limitations, injuries that affect how you hold the club as well. But feel is going to be important, how comfortable it is in your hands, but we'll see what it does to performance as well. So we're going to start off with my gamer grip, and this is one that I use and the size that I use, and get a bit of a comparison between, we've got all of these different grip types, different sizes, different weights that we'll come on to shortly as well, but different sizes, primarily looking at how the size and the fit in our hands affects how the club and the player interact. Now, it's your only point of contact with the club, so it is a really important bit to get right. So, what do we look for initially in terms of grip size? Well, we're going to look at what size glove does someone wear as a bit of a marker point. And then based on that, going to start looking at hand dimensions. So, for example, I have not overly long finger length, but a slightly broader hand size. I don't have, my hand drops back into the sort of different sides of the hand, rather than some players get longer and extend into the index finger. So all of these things go forward to give us a start point to say, right, what hand dimensions are you? And baseline, what grip size would we expect you to use? Now, we've got undersized, standard, mid-size, jumbo / oversized, and then there are some even bigger than that. So there are 4 or 5 different categories of grip that give us a start point based on kind of initial hand dimensions that we can use as a base point to test and build out on. It is a mixture of theory in terms of hand dimensions and base sizing, but also player's preference. Being your only point of contact with the club, it's got to be comfortable, it's got to feel right in your hands. Without that, you get tension. When you get tension, you lose that fluidity, which leads to less consistency of pattern through the ball, but also a little bit less speed. And if you're having to use these sort of hand and forearm muscles to hold on to the club, then it can start to maneuver the face around. You lose that consistency of face, and you're going to get discrepancies in shot pattern as well. So I'm going to start off looking at how this fits in my hand here. So what are we looking for? So I get this into I like the grip into my fingers, get it into my fingers here, my little finger gets round past the center of the grip, but the grip sits underneath the butt of the hand there. So that means it's fully in that finger, we've got lots of finger to grip contact, and that can't come out unless I do something straight. I've then got, as I kind of close that hand down, tips of the fingers touching the pad of my left thumb there. So again, it's in my fingers, there's plenty of finger to grip contact, so it's nice and secure in that top hand, and I can do all kinds of things there, move it around, waggle it around, and it's rock solid in that left hand. And then depending on bottom hand dimensions, we'd look at how that grip tapers. Again, we'll come on to that a little bit later on, but that security in that top hand there, that's ultimately what we're looking for. So I'm going to hit a few shots. We'll look at the data. I'll talk about how it feels in the hand as well, and then we'll go to the different grip sizes and look at why you might go slightly smaller or slightly larger, but also what going too small and too big can do to performance. This will be different player to player. Swing patterns will mark out whether a slightly smaller or slightly larger grip will suit you, but we'll go into those as we look at each one in line. So I talked about glove size. I use a medium cadet, or the GX is maybe just a hair smaller than some, so medium, and this is good for me. The cadet, which is not the finest name from a pride point of view, but it's a slightly shorter finger length that some manufacturers do. So where I've got a slightly bigger palm proportion to finger, that's why I use that size. So I like it in my fingers, but I don't want it too small, so I play a standard size built up a couple of extra tapes. So what that does, it makes it feel nice and secure in that left hand. There's a little bit less tapering in this grip as well, which again fills out that bottom hand. I'm very right-handed, so a slightly bigger bottom hand just helps me quieten that right hand down slightly, but it stabilizes into that right trigger finger. So what that means is that for me, I can just use my body to turn back and through, and it stays nice and secure in my hands. I don't have to exert lots of pressure on the grip to keep control of the club. That's a really critical thing, because the moment you have to hang on tight or change your grip pressure to get control of that club, you're going to find that face goes all over the place. You lose fluidity, flow to the swing. That flow to the swing and that relaxation in your hands and arms is what gets that kind of lag on whip, that power whip that's been talked about in the past from coaching. Is you don't want to feel like you've got to create a release pattern or manage the club face, because the more you've got to do that, or the more you've got to kind of control the club in your hands, you're losing all that nice freedom to the swing. And that's one of the things we see all the top players doing, and I'm not stating that my swing is like the top players here, but what they have is that absolute freedom through the ball, but with softness through their arms. So they can create speed, but most importantly, keep control of the club. And yeah, say some players will prefer a bigger or a smaller feel, and there isn't an absolute right or wrong dependent on your hand measurements. There is going to be light and shade based on players' profile and preferences, things like grip material from a tread point of view, from a comfort side of things. But for me, a very kind of neutral grip size, maybe slightly larger based on my actual hand size, probably because my miss has always been left. Slightly bigger feels a bit more controlled. But ultimately, the correct size of the grip gives you that freedom through the ball, and I can just let the swing go and not be manipulating through the ball. So, what happens when we go smaller? Let's have a look. So grip change, we start off at just over D2, D2.2 with this grip. We're now up at D3. So going from the standard size to an undersized. Now this isn't one of the lightest grips. Some of the undersizes drop from, this grip at 53 grams can drop down to 40, 42 grams, maybe even slightly less. So which can majorly affect swing weight. That'll be about 2 points. This one's only 0.8, but that still has an effect. We've dropped the total weight, but it swings more head heavy. Bigger differences to come for the bigger sizes, but something to be really, really aware of, because if you're going down in grip size, we can't take weight off the head. So if it starts to swing head heavy as a result of the grip change, there actually isn't anything you can do. Maybe shorten them slightly, but then that's irreversible. So just be conscious of that when going down in size. So looking at how this fits in the hands, we've gone smaller, so the outer diameter is smaller. So what we get here is finger wraps around a little bit further. Now, that in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but as the grip gets a little bit narrower down, we can see I'm now overlapping. So what that creates is space here. There's a gap between my fingers and the club. So that creates room for the club to move around him. So that didn't happen with the standard size grip for me. So that in itself is going to mean that I'm going to naturally start to grip it tighter to stop that moving. So what it can also do, it can also move more easily, twist. And with the forces at impact, the club basically stops a little bit at impact. That creates quite a lot of rotational force, and that can jump the club out of position and end up twisting the club face. So it destabilizes a little bit at impact. The other bit, getting to this bottom hand, is that what we can see here as I put that hand on, actually, it doesn't really fill that trigger finger out. I've got to close it down to get control. Otherwise, my hand can move around. So I've got to pincer it to get control of it, which tightens up, stiffens up that right hand, but also then means, as we were saying earlier, we lose a little bit of flow. So let's hit a few shots, see what happens to the data. So the initial feel is that I've got to get the club into my hands in the right place. Now with the correct size of grip, you put your hands on it, kind of finds its position for you. So one key to is the grip size right for you, is if you feel like you've got to get it into the right place in your hands rather than just placing your hands on the club and it being stable, that's a real marker, especially from a small size point of view, that this can move. I can put this in a lot of places in my hand and it doesn't quite feel right. So I've got to really find a place to get control of it, get it more into my fingers. But what it's also done with that smaller size, it's a little bit lighter. So to swing with, it's noticeably more head heavy. So my timing's got to change to deliver the club a little bit. So not only have I changed how it sits in my hands, I'm now also changing what I've got to do to deliver the club head. So the dead weight of the total club's only dropped by 5 grams or so. We've only changed the swing weight by under a point, but that has an effect on how that club tracks through the ball. So to hit another one here, what that smaller size does, and so where it can be a good thing for some players, is you've got to get it more into the crook of the fingers to get control. For some players, getting it into the fingers is a good thing because it allows your hands to maneuver the club head. That can be a good thing if your transition drops the club open. You need to use those hand muscles that need to get into the fingers to square the club face up. So if you shallow out and open the club face and then just turn your body through, it goes out right. So erring on the smaller side actually lets you get it into the fingers and lets you work the club face a little bit more, which is really saving. If the technique's off a little bit, it allows you to save the club a bit more easily. But if you're online, then going too small also means that that club face can get a little bit out of control. So it makes it a little bit more volatile. So where on the one hand, you could say, well, it lets you save it a bit more easily. The downside is it allows you to move the face around a little bit more. So the general stability of the club, to describe how it feels through impact, is it feels like the club head flashes a little bit more, my hands get a little bit more active, and it relies on timing just that little bit more. And the other side being, I know you get into a bit of rough, grabs the club head, that's then when that club can really twist around and you can lose strike. So that consistency of shot and flight, and I almost feel like I've got to rein the swing back a little bit, because if I go after it, it feels like it's going to go left, right. So going too small gets a little bit too much in the fingers, and I've got to hold on, or I've got to manipulate my action to keep that club face under control, which really isn't where you want to go to. So what happens when we go bigger? So switch into the mid-size. Now mid-size is equivalent to about 6 or 7 layers of tape under a standard size. So most people think it's a lot less than that. Actually, it does make quite a significant difference over a standard size of grip from a diameter point of view. In terms of balance versus the initial grip, it's taken the swing weight down a little bit, about 0.5, 0.6 of a point. The tall velvet mid-size that I've got on here is not an overly heavy grip. So there are a few grips that stick around the 56, 57 grams. There are a couple a little bit lighter, but the majority tend to go up to 60. There are some at 66, 67. So that again really loses feel for the club head. Now you can add a little bit of weight to get the swing weight back up, but knock-on effect of that is you're taking the total weight of the club up. So again, something to be conscious of. But for me, again, going back to how it fits in the hand, this one's the equivalent to about 3 or 4 layers bigger than I play. So we can start to see little finger's still round past the center, so it's still playable. But I'm starting to lose that bit of contact between the tips of fingers and the pad of my thumb. So again, I've got to get it to close down, I've got to either wrap my hand around a little bit more or exert a bit more pressure to just close that gap up. Now, it's not beyond playable at this point, but it's very much on the upper end of where I should be playing or could be playing. So I'll hit a few shots and see what it does. So for me, having been smaller and smaller for me, feeling maybe a little bit less comfortable, going a bit too big, I can still feel it's bigger than I would normally play, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable. And so this is the equivalent of, say, 3 or 4 layers more than I would ordinarily play. If you're a standard size grip single layer, this will feel pretty different. But I say it's not, for someone with a medium large glove, it would be verging on this sort of size. Certainly the medium large, we start to look at a mid-size grip. Hasn't affected the overall balance of the club too much. So in terms of performance, I wouldn't be expecting a large difference moving to this grip. So conscious that it's a bit bigger than I would normally use, but it doesn't feel like it loses too much flow through the club. I didn't strike that one too well, but actually the movement of the club didn't feel overly restricted. This one has a normal tapering to it, so it's not overly large in the bottom hand. Bottom hand feels perfectly comfortable on this. But the top hand is, say, that little bit bigger than I would normally play. So I kind of feel like I'm having just to almost re-grip a little bit to get it to sit in my hands comfortably. But in the swing, don't feel like it massively changes my pattern through the ball. And this is one of the things with grip sizes, it isn't a kind of one formula fits all. There is room, there's sort of shades of grey, rather than just being black and white, you're this glove size, you must play this grip. Because for some players, that bigger grip's just going to feel, if you've got a hand or a forearm injury, or a hand issue, arthritis, something like that, that's slightly bigger means you haven't got to close your hand down as much, you haven't got to exert quite as much pressure to fill the fingers out. And erring a little bit bigger, if you have a bit of an injury or a hand condition, then that will take a little bit of strain off that top hand in particular. Your bottom hand, less of an issue because it's more of a support to the club. Your top hand is the one that has the real control over the club face. However, erring a bit bigger, so it takes a bit of strain off the hand. I feel like I maybe lose a little bit of fluidity through the ball, but certainly, very, very playable. As a grip for me, very playable. Should I feel like I wanted that little bit more size, just to fill that top hand out, but whilst a bit on the bigger side, definitely usable. Maybe lose a bit of speed, a little bit, but again, this is going to be player to player. I'm so dialed into my grip size, having used it for the last 10 years, that I'm just conscious it's different. And I think if there's a consciousness of it feeling uncomfortable, that's one thing. If you're changing grip size, it will feel a little different, and often takes a few rounds just to kind of get used to that different sizing. But normally, if the grip's too small, you've got to hold on tight, you tend to get tension-based injuries in the forearm, in your lead arm, either in the wrist or particularly kind of golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, because of if you've got to grip tight, then the tendons and the ligaments are tight and they don't absorb shock the same way. So you often get either rotation-based injuries or vibration-based injuries. So changing that size can help to alleviate a bit of that as well. So one step bigger, not necessarily, for me, not necessarily too bad. Let's take it on a little bit further. Let's go up to the jumbo and see how much difference that makes. So now moving up to the jumbo or oversized grip. So again, mid-size to jumbo, you're generally looking at the equivalent of adding 6 or 7 layers of sort of standard 2-inch build-up tape underneath. So it's quite a big change. I picked this grip to start with because this one's around about sort of 63, 64 grams, so it's not overly heavy. A lot of the oversizes, because there's just more material as you go bigger, start to push heavier than that. And we've got one over there. If I grab this one, the CPX Jumbo, this one's 66, the taller velvet, this is 82 grams, which is a vast difference in weight. You're looking at 30 grams heavier than a standard size grip. Now, that has a huge knock-on effect to the balance of the club. So going up to this one from the mid-size, we're now, we started with the grip that I'm using at just over D2. This is now C9, C9.5, so just over C9. So that's two and a half, 2 3/4 swing weight points difference, which is a lot, because in order to get that back up to the same swing weight, I've got to add another 5 or 6 grams to the head. So we've taken the dead weight up by about 15 grams, which is, if we're looking at that from a sharp point of view, is really significant. If we then go to this one, well, we're putting in 30 grams extra over the original grip. That's roughly 6 swing weight points. I've then got to add another 10 grams to the head, maybe slightly more, to get that back up. We're 40 grams heavier in total, just to get the same static balance. Now, that it may not be as much of a difference on swing weight to match up. However, we're adding a huge amount of weight to the club. We wouldn't even countenance doing that with a shaft, but we merrily change grips, thinking, oh, I'll go bigger, I'll just pop that one on. Can't have much of an effect, it's just a bit of rubber. Well, that bit of rubber can have a massive effect on how your club swings. So really pay attention to the grip weight when you're changing them over. So looking at the sizing of the grip, if we go into that part again, if I get this into my fingers like I would normally grip it, that little finger now is barely past the center of the grip. So any force, it takes absolutely no force at all to get that slipping out of that bottom finger. And I'm nowhere near closing that gap down. So in terms of this now, I can get my fingers rounded if I move it into the palm of my hand, but then I lose a lot of that mobility and ability to use my hands in the swing. So I've either got the choice of stick it in the palm of my hand, and if you swing like Bryson, that's exactly what he does, because he wants to take his hands out of it altogether. So there are swings where this could work, more on that a little bit later on, but if I get it into my fingers, then I've got to really hold on to that to stop it moving out of my hands. So not only have I made the club a lot heavier, I've now really changed the way this sits in my fingers. So again, what does that mean to swing with? So because I've got to get it one way to get it into my fingers. It's not that difficult to put my hands on the club. However, I'm very conscious this now feels very different in the top part of my hand. And a very different pattern through the ball. So as you can see where that's gone, swing line, half a degree out to in. The swing line is still the same, but what's happened is it's now starting to change how that left, for me, how my left wrist moves, how the club allows me to move through the ball. So if I just move on it, essentially, it blocks out that wrist from dropping and rotating, so it starts to move the handle that way for me. This will be a little bit different player to player, but what we can say is that it fundamentally changes the way that my left wrist can move with this size of grip in hand. So I'm trying to swing another one again. I'm just trying to move and let the club, let my body react to how the club feels in my hands. So I'm struggling to square that up. So both of those are now out that way. Again, path 0.6, face 6 degrees open. So I've then got to work, I've got to do quite a lot to get that club face back online. So I'm starting to have to build in compensations. So angle of attack's good, path's good, but all of a sudden the ball's nowhere near where I want it to go. 6 degrees face angle changes a heck of a lot. So in terms of shot shape, and that's easily missing a green. So I've then got to start to change what I'm doing with my swing to deliver that club face, which potentially you could undo a lot of good work from a technique standpoint that you may have done just by changing grip. And this isn't even the biggest one. So if we go up a little bit bigger again, we'll see what happens. So moving up bigger again, these ones, we're all familiar with the grips that Bryson uses, the Jumbo Max. This isn't the largest, they go bigger than this. This one's the medium, but this is still noticeably bigger than the standard Jumbo that you get from other brands. Now, the principles behind why Bryson uses them are because he gets it into the palm of his hand, and his swing, very much back and through and body, and not really a hands base. He's not wanting to use his hands to rotate the face. So there is a principle by going super large, proportionate to hand size. It does mean that actually you have to get it in the middle of your hands, and that actually makes it very hard to make that rotation, and it allows, basically it stops me making a lot of that wrist cock, and I have to move the club back and through with my core and my body. For Bryson, who's a big, strong lad, that's part of the principle of what he's done with his action to stabilize the club face, and he's done it very, very impressively. However, for a lot of players, it might feel very, very strange. Certainly for me, that feels like I'm holding a cricket bat handle, or I guess for those of you in the States, a baseball bat, something like that. Field hockey stick, where it's a much, much bigger diameter, where we're not looking for as much kind of lag and whip with the hands. This certainly creates that. But in terms of how, if I were to try and get this into my fingers, what you can see there is that, that's barely rounded at all. I've kind of got just the very, very tip of my finger to try and get some kind of hook around it. And that finger doesn't even get past, barely past the bottom half of that. So I've got to get it into the palm of my hand to get any kind of wrap around, to get any kind of purchase on it. Now, this particular one is one of the lighter ones. This actually brings the swing weight back up very slightly from the Tour Velvet Jumbo. Partly there's a bit of a grip cap on this, but it's the same kind of weight. It's 61, 62 grams, so it's not an overly heavy grip. They do some at 128, which is heavier than most shafts that people play. So this one keeps the dead weight down, but it's the size and what it does to my patterns through the ball, which I'm going to focus on here. So again, really kind of sits right more into the kind of the middle part of my hand rather than the fingers, and more into the palm side of my hand rather than the fingers here. So what we find, if I try and swing this normally as I ordinarily would, even more than the standard Jumbo grip, 4 right. 1 degree into out, 10 degrees open. So it's a 10-degree difference, broadly speaking, than where I'd be with a normal grip. I'm going to do one more of those, just because it's so different. Okay, got that got that through. Maybe the first one was a little bit of a kind of a shock reaction to the club, but we're still seeing it go out right, as we did with the jumbo grips. So for me, once I go up that much too big, without really working and manipulating to square it up, I struggle to get that face back online. Now, going more extreme like this, the kind of action that may well suit it, if I get this into the palm of my hand, is where it's very much a body turn, a big body movement swing. Now, obviously, if you've got very large hands, where these grips have been great, we've done quite a lot of, this or slightly one size down. We've done a lot of these for those who want to go to the jumbo size of grip or a bit bigger, but when we don't have to go up to kind of 70, 80 grams worth of grip. So we've done quite a few of these as players with bigger hands need that bigger size. But if I get this into the palm of my hand, then basically if I just make a really big body turn, my finish, I really notice it. My finish is really up there. There's none of that going on. There's none of that kind of lag and rotation, but it's almost a kind of that left wrist is pretty much locked out. So it still goes to the right for me. So I've got to really feel like if I get that path, I'm going to feel like I work the path more inside. Yeah, so for me at this size, just doesn't work. I just can't get that face wrapped over. Go down a little bit, I'd be able to, but for me the principles that Bryson swings with just doesn't work. I need my hands to square the face up. So that would be something you can use if you have the opportunity to do something like testing a few grip sizes out. Using the air compressors like we do means you haven't got to use the grip tape and wait for it to dry. It means you can just switch them on and off. So that's a great way to test, but you've got to put just a layer of masking tape down so that it doesn't stick on. But if you've got the chance to do a bit of testing, you'll start to see which ones suit your patterns, because they'll be naturally a little bit straight and they'll feel better in your hands. You'll feel like it's a more natural move through the ball, more relaxed, and that you can stay in posture maybe a little bit. And if you start to get the club working out of line, then it's going to change the way you stand. So that grip size and how it fits in your hands is really critical to a lot of other things. But ultimately, what the ball does and how consistent it is going to tell you an awful lot. So going to give you a little bit of a view of the size of the butt diameter of each of these grips, and just then talk a little bit about the data and then round up after that. So this view here will give you a bit of a sight of running from the left as you look at it to the right of the size from undersized to standard to mid-size to jumbo to oversized grip. There's a really big change in the diameter, and it's obviously not just the straight across diameter. Obviously your hand wraps around, so the bigger you go, proportionally it gets, you can argue, sort of exponentially bigger. You've got that much more length to wrap around. So there's some really big differences you can make to grip size. There are plenty of grips out there, and then you've got the nuances of going layers of tape between, how they taper to get them feeling as comfortable as possible. So big differences out there, but weight of grip, as we said earlier, really critical to make sure that you're not throwing, if you've got a club that swings well, that you're not throwing the balance of the club out and therefore your dispersion, your timing. But from a results point of view, what are we seeing? So for me, it'll be slightly different for everyone out there because all our hands are different sizes. But what we can see is that the grip size which I use, the white dots here, are the longest, and the dispersion pattern with the standard size, undersized, mid-size, I can control. They're all down the line. But the most efficiency we've got, and we'll look at the numbers again shortly to back this up, is with the size that I use. So we can see with the mid-size and the undersize, we lose a little bit of speed, a little bit of distance, but the left to right pattern's pretty similar. The undersize is slightly more to the left, whereas the standard and the mid-size, I can kind of manage and keep the face squarer. However, these ones out here are the jumbo and then the kind of proper oversized grips. So there's a really big difference. I mean, they sit 23 to 27 yards right. Even if we ignore, I'll take out the really wide one there. Make sure I'm going to take out the right shot. Then what we can see there is that pattern there. They're both 25 odd yards right to target, which that shows how much dispersion pattern when you get it wrong. And for some players, the smaller size is going to be the one that's further off. For me, the bigger size, it just takes the ball completely offline. So I lose that flow and that ability to square the club face up. And it's not just a small difference, it's a big difference. So I can go one notch bigger than is correct for me, or smaller, but I cannot go further off than that. And that's something that, you know, the principles and the theories are great, but in practice, disastrous for my golf game. So from a data point of view, you know, what do we see? So start down the bottom, you know, this is the one with the correct size for me. You know, club speed, you know, a little bit high. We take 86.9, half a mile out of the mid-size, a mile an hour and a half more than the others. So not significantly different, but because I've got as much flow and efficiency to my action as possible, I'm getting the most ball speed. So 122.8, you know, 117, 18, 16, 16.7. You know, so we're seeing up to 7 miles an hour drop in ball speed. Now that's see face angle rather than necessary strike point, but you know, that goes from, you know, 179.6 to 161. I've dropped best part of 20 yards. Now obviously you'd find a way of squaring it up, but a significant change in efficiency and flight, and that inability to control face angle from, you know, pretty square with the 3 smaller sizes to 5-6 degrees open with the bigger sizes, you know, that leads to, if I add in, I'm going to add in side total here. Now this is in feet, so the averages for side total go from 7 foot, 9 foot, 3.5 foot, 89 foot, 75 foot, 25 and 30 yards. So a vast difference in where the ball's ending up. So you really can, your tail of the tape here is you really can destroy your golf game by getting the grip size off, because it's the bit of the club that you hold on to, therefore has a significant impact on how you control the club head. So it's a mixture of, you know, size differences. It's a mixture of, you know, the comfort, the texture will again lead to relaxation, consistency and freedom through the ball. So that's another factor to bear in mind. But you know, how it fits your hands, but also the weight of the grip, what it does to the swing weight and the balance and the dead weight of the club, you can really significantly throw that off as well. So several factors to take into account. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a lead into what sizes might do to, you know, to performance and going too big or too small. You know, to take a baseline, you know, small, or, you know, for ladies or juniors, the undersizes in terms of glove sizes would be where we'd look to start from. You know, a small, medium into kind of the more standard size. Medium, large, you're getting into potentially mid-size, you know, and then large, extra large, then we're starting to look at jumbos. And then there are some players that have, you know, hands like shovels, quite frankly, where the oversizes, the significant oversizes start to be the correct size of grip, rather than just being something to kind of quieten hands down. So that gives us kind of the baseline we'd look to, and then see how it fits in someone's hands, and then the comfort, and what does it do to that shot pattern. Too big, likely to miss it for a right-hander, too far right, and a left-hander too far left. Too small, you're going to see a little bit of extra dispersion, and potentially for some players that's going to lead to over-rotation and a pull. Other players, it really tightens up on it and kind of holds the club face off, but you lose that flow, and again, that bit of a distance, consistency, dispersion, consistency. So hopefully that gives you the leader into it. You know, check out all our other videos on, you've done some on grip sizes, grip weights, swing weights. You know, check them all out, and you know, any other content you want us to look at, let us know and we'll look into it for you. Hope you enjoyed the video.